think Monsanto should be brought to trial for crimes against humanity? Well, then you're going to want to tune in to today's episode of the Nutrition Heretic Podcast when we continue our conversation with Andre Loy, author of The Myths of Safe Pesticides and a member of the Monsanto Tribunal, a world court in The Hague which aims to do just that. During this in-depth discussion, you'll learn the significance of the trial, why the personalities behind Monsanto have such a blatant disregard for human life, and why you may want to trade in your PC for a Mac.
Meet Gina. Gina wanted to lose weight, so she spent 2 years fasting, detoxing, and dabbling with vegan diets while practicing a shit ton of yoga to lose 25 pounds. But it took so long that nobody noticed. Then, Gina started Frenching her food by eating fatty cheeses, butter, sausages, and red meat, and lost 15 more pounds in only 2 months. Everybody noticed this time. Frenching your food unlocks the riddle of weight loss that skinny French chicks use to slim down, look young, and live longer despite doing everything wrong. Be like Gina. Start Frenching your food today by visiting nutritionheretic.com/Frenching.
Fat is bad for you.
I just pop a pill and I'm fine.
Meat is murder.
It's time for bad food punishment. It's time for real nourishment. It's time for the Nutrition Heretic.
The following program is provided as information only and may not be construed as medical or health advice. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. No action or inaction should be taken solely on the basis of the information provided here. Please consult with a licensed healthcare professional or doctor on any matter relating to your health and well-being.
Tell us a little bit about, because I don't want to keep you forever, but I do want to talk a little bit about this. The Monsanto Tribunal. I know that there was a mock trial in The Hague, I believe it was last year, that found Monsanto guilty of, I believe it was crimes against humanity, for lack of a better description. What are the plans for the tribunal now? I just saw this morning they announced judges. Is that for an actual tribunal? Are they actually going to be brought to court? Will we actually be able to defeat or change the course of this monster?
Okay, to explain what these tribunals are, these aren't actually a mock trial. These are citizens' trials.
Okay.
They have a long history. Actually, it first started in the U.S. When the Nazis in Germany went and did their show trials. And so there were some of the eminent jurists in the U.S. that then basically put together a citizens' trial with reputable judges and lawyers and showed that these people were innocent and that the Nazi system of show trials were making a mockery of justice. What has happened now with these citizens' trials is that they now are brought up where governments either fail to act or where governments are acting corruptly. And we would argue both is happening with in the case of Monsanto. So those of us on the steering committee, we've put together this trial, or put it together. It's being run as a proper international legal trial in The Hague, which is where the World Court is.
Yes.
And we've got a professor of law, Dr. Olivier de Schutter, who was the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Food. Now, he is a law professor in Brussels, and his university and legal department are actually putting together this trial, so it'll be run in the best way possible at the highest level of law. If you look at the judges we've selected, these are internationally recognized judges or jurists.
Okay.
This is not a mock trial. This is not a show trial. And there will be proper lawyers or attorneys, and if Monsanto refuses to come to that trial, we will still appoint an attorney for Monsanto.
Okay.
Yes, as in any trial, if a defendant refuses to go to that trial, they can be tried in absentia.
Uh-huh.
And in this case, to make sure that we're following proper legal procedure, there will be an attorney appointed by the court to defend Monsanto, so that this will be a proper trial. But it's where we can bring the evidence out. Now, the only thing with these trials where they're different from
the People's Court,
say, a national trial, we can't impose a penalty.
Okay, that's what I think a lot of people want to know. Like, what are the repercussions? Yeah. Okay, now they lost. Now what?
Well, basically, where the penalty is the penalty of public opinion, because what we do is what we can show is by presenting the evidence and getting that out, that, if the trial finds them guilty, we have very strong grounds to publicise that. And that is very important. Things like the International Agency for Research into Cancer, when they classified glyphosate, the main ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup, as the second highest level of a carcinogen, which is what is called probably carcinogenic to humans. That means it definitely causes cancer in animals, and we only have limited studies of it causing cancer in humans, although those studies are pretty good to show that it does cause cancer. Now that has caused their sales to drop so dramatically that they've had to actually lay off thousands of people. And that's the same thing with these trials. The adverse publicity does affect them and will continue to affect them.
So would the trial also consider bringing to court governments, Hillary Clinton, as being in bed with the enemy, let's just call them? Is there any kind of repercussion, any kind of bad publicity that will shame the U.S. into not supporting this anymore? And is that even within the scope? Is that even within the scope of what the tribunal can accomplish?
Well, one of the things that will be one of the areas that will be put into this trial will be the way that they have corrupted governments.
Mm-hmm.
But we won't be specifically putting the US on trial or France or England or any other country on trial.
Okay.
But what we will do is show how they have corrupted the regulatory process. We have very good documentation on that, so that will come out. We'll also show how they've corrupted science and also the attacks that they've done on reputable scientists as well.
Right. So yeah, because let me put it this way: you're talking to an American here. We want revenge. Everybody wants they want their 15 minutes of fame. They want their cut because. Put it this way. We have TV ads for, over 20 years now running saying, if you've been harmed by mesothelioma because you worked in a facility that had asbestos, then call this law number. People are looking for some kind of money basically back, for their suffering because their family member who died of breast cancer. Really, you're saying that we're just going to have to hit them in the pocketbook, but in a different way. Yeah.
Look, those trials have already started in the US. It's already the first class action, a group of people suing Monsanto because they've got cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
What we're seeing now is just the beginning of the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And this tribunal will provide very good evidence, because it'll be legal evidence that then can be used in these future lawsuits.
Right. So what do you think of some of these TV scientists? We talked about this in the opening. Some of these TV science that people, Bill Nye the Science Guy, black dude from Cosmos, whose name I always get wrong. What about these guys? Are they just complete sellouts? Are they part of the people who are being paid off? Because initially these guys came out and said, we should proceed slowly. Good science says, go slow. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And then a couple weeks later, new car later, whatever, they come out and they say, well, you're an idiot if you don't believe in the mission of Monsanto?
Yeah, look, I basically have very little respect for most of these TV scientists for that reason. The other reason why I have no respect is because when we try to contact them to show them evidence that they're wrong, that they refuse to even look at it or talk about it. So I regard them as in the pocket of the big corporations, and they're just a spokesperson doing a sales pitch for their products and pretending that they're presenting good science when they're not.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, it's a lot of Monsanto companies that are advertising on that network during their show. Yeah. So they know which side their bread is buttered on. What are we looking at for the future? First of all, actually, friend and follower Gypsy McLeod wants to know, what are some of the worst and most dangerous, in your opinion? Are they all just equally dangerous as far as the GMOs, the pesticides? What are like the main ones if we had to just choose, let's say 2 or 3 to avoid at all costs?
If I had to choose 2, the first one now would be glyphosate, Roundup, because it is pervasive. It's everywhere. And most importantly, it's in now that we're starting to test people. It's only recently we've been able to test for it. We're finding that most people have glyphosate in their system,
right?
And we know that for women, for instance, it works. It causes the increase in development of breast cancer, but we know it causes a lot of other diseases. The list of diseases that it can cause is long. There's probably 30 or 40 different diseases that we know now can be caused by this chemical.
Grief.
The other one would be atrazine. That's another herbicide. Okay. That's the second most used, and once again, that's found everywhere in the environment. And we know that it's in people as well. And we know, for instance, it's one of the major causes of it causes ovarian cancer and other defects to the ovaries.
Right. Now when people like Gypsy or myself, we sit down at the table or we go shopping, let's say, it's not going to say contains atrazine, contains glyphosate. What products are we most likely to encounter those chemicals on?
Virtually everything.
Oh, God.
That's so widespread.
Good grief.
That it's used on nearly all food groups, and it's very residual. So, for instance, if it's used on pastures, for instance, the milk or the beef will have it in it.
Right.
Now that we can test for these things, there's virtually no watercourse in the USA that doesn't have residues of it. So it's in our drinking water, it's in our air, it's in our food.
Is there any hope for remediating what's already there, whether it's in your body or in your soil or on your food? Can you bleach the hell out of your food and it's no longer there? Like, what can we do to is it anaerobic? That was actually a question that came up with Chris Trump, who is our expert on Korean natural farming here on the island. His understanding is glyphosate, for example, is it suffocates everything it comes into contact with. So, is there a way to oxygenate it out of you, or
what we do know gets back to the food you eat, and we have very good studies showing that within a few days of eating organic food, the levels of these chemicals in urine go down to virtually nothing.
Right.
You can excrete it out and keep your levels as low as possible. And then on top of that, by having a healthy diet, making sure that you get a lot of antioxidants that will actually react with these chemicals and detoxify them. The little bit that's left, you can detoxify it.
Okay.
And the good studies are too with organic food. We actually know it contains around 30% more natural antioxidants. We have good studies. Everyone that's come out looking at organic food, even the ones that have been critical, have found that organic food has much higher antioxidants, from 16% up to 70% more, so it averages out at about 30% extra antioxidants.
Right. So do these chemicals need oxygen to survive? Or is oxygen its enemy? Is maybe another way to say that.
What actually happens in the environment, they're broken down by microbes, by enzymes. The microbes secrete. In our body, our livers produce a range of enzymes which will actually break down these chemicals.
And neutralize them.
And the other one which we do know is fasting or semi-fasting.
Right.
Will cleanse your body of these. So, for instance, Dr. McCullough, in his latest book, has a very good chapter on it, showing that even if you don't want to fast every day, a simple thing is going 12 hours without food.
Right.
And it actually changes your body's metabolism from one that uses basic sugar into one where you're actually using your fat stores. And in doing that, you're actually taking the chemicals out of these fats, because many of these chemicals are fat soluble.
Yeah.
And this is particularly important for women, because what estrogen does is puts an extra layer of fat just below the skin in women. That's why women's skin is so softer than men. But as a result, it means women are carrying an extra body load of these toxins.
Right.
And leading to a whole range of diseases. And also we know, very importantly, that fat layer is used for making breast milk. It's used
Absolutely.
for the food that goes across the placenta to the developing fetus.
Absolutely.
And, if there's toxic chemicals in that fat, it'll go across the placenta to the developing baby, or it'll end up in the breast milk.
Yes.
So limiting your exposure to these chemicals is number one, and by having intermittent fasting to get rid of it, the little bit that you have, will ensure that basically you'll largely avoid the problems that these chemicals will cause, particularly that they can cause to your children.
Okay. So this is a question that I had, and it was reiterated by one of our followers, Alain Rabary. I don't know if he's French, but his first name is spelled French, so I'm going to pronounce it French. And he wants to know, one, how does Monsanto think that it's worth making money by poisoning the planet? And by the planet, I mean everything on the planet. Don't judge me, people. And also, what can we do to encourage them to do something good for the planet? In other words, use their powers for good instead of evil. Is there a dialogue going on about this? You want to show off your fancy scientists and everything they can do. Show us something good, man.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really important question. Monsanto, the reason why Monsanto, the company that's going before the tribunal, because they've got a long history going back of developing a whole range of toxic products like PCBs, Agent Orange, aspartame, and glyphosate, and so on and so on. I think the problem is their corporate culture. It's just about making money at any cost. It's the case with many of these companies. I think one of the issues that I think is very interesting when you start looking at some of the work that psychologists are doing when they're looking at the heads of many of these corporations, and they actually find that most of them are actually sociopaths or psychopaths.
Oh, geez.
Different degrees. That's why they do so well and they survive so well. And it's why, they're not thinking about what they're doing to other people. It's all about them and what they can get.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it actually goes back to, we really got to rethink our model of democracy and the fact that we're allowing these corporations to have so much power in our societies. And that's the only way we're going to change it. We have to also look at having systems that are more participatory in the boards of these companies, so that it's not the most toxic individuals, the psychopaths and sociopaths, that can fight their way to the top and become the leaders. It's actually, it's symptomatic of a bigger problem. And we've tried, you write and you try to talk with people, but you get nowhere with them. You try to say that if they change their model, so what they're doing is making, pesticides or plant protection products that the organic sector could use would be much better, but they're not interested because from their point of view, there's no profits in it.
Right. Well, there's I think in the U.S., this is, and assuming it's very similar in other countries as well, there's that whole patentability, so we have to manipulate nature in order to have that 17-year run on a patent where nobody can oppose us and nobody can get in on the game while we still own this patent. I'm not sure if you answered this as specifically as one of our guests, our audience was asking. Tom Zelig wants to know when the first cancers were detected by glyphosate. And then he also wants to know what kind of testing was done to substantiate that marketing point that it's safe enough to drink, which, as you know, the Monsanto, I'm just going to call him a stooge, was asked by a French reporter to drink a glass of glyphosate. And he said, yes, I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to do that. And then called him a name and left because that adds to your credibility, buddy.
Yeah. The first reports of glyphosate causing cancer in the first studies go back to the early 1980s. And at one point, the US EPA had glyphosate listed as on one of their levels of causing cancer. But then what happened is that Monsanto put pressure on them to review it, and they looked at the studies and they manipulated the interpretation of the data and just signed off that it did not cause cancer. I've actually got a copy of that original document from the US EPA, and three of the people who were on that committee refused to either sign it or they wrote, "Do not concur on it."
Mm.
So it's pushed through, but so more than 30 years ago that it was classified as a carcinogen. Since then, there are many more studies on it, and particularly studies in humans showing that it causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma,
right,
which is an epidemic. In the 1940s, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma was one of these rare cancers that people hardly ever get. Now it's one of the most common cancers. It's one of the most common cancers in children, and we know that glyphosate is one of the causes. And once again, studies like that go back to the 1980s.
Wow.
So we've had 30 years of knowing about it. And fortunately, the International Agency for Research into Cancer now has looked at these studies and given it the second highest classification for causing cancer.
Right.
So what was the other part of that question? I forgot.
Oh, so we wanted to know how far back it went, and then where did this it's safe enough to drink line? When did they decide that it was safe enough to drink? Why?
Safe enough to drink was, of course, pushed out by the company, and based on some of the tests, what they use with pesticides. One of the ways they test the toxicity, and this is what we call acute toxicity, the amount you need to take that will kill you in 2 weeks. It's called an LD50, which is lethal dose. LD means lethal dose for 50% of test animals, a kilogram of test animals, and how many milligrams will kill half of them within 2 weeks. And if you measure pure glyphosate based on this acute toxicity, it's about the same as caffeine, for instance.
Okay.
And so they say, oh, look, the LD50 is so high that it's safe enough to drink. Saying that, what people buy, they don't buy glyphosate, they buy these formulations. And along with the glyphosate, when you say buy Roundup, you get all these other solvents, synergists, other things that make it more toxic. And all the studies will actually show that Roundup is far more toxic than glyphosate. And one of the, Roundup, for instance, is one of the few chemicals where we have an LD50, lethal dose 50% for humans. Normally you don't test it on humans.
Right, exactly.
But
well, in a way they are, aren't they?
There's been enough suicides of people drinking Roundup that they've looked at it and determined how much Roundup is needed to kill people.
Oh, God.
And that's about half a cup.
Ugh.
So, but they still put out this mythology. It's safe enough that you can drink it, but it is not safe and it does kill people.
Oh, man. I mean, you just brought up, people killing themselves. And I think about the, nearly 300,000 Indian farmers who have committed suicide. I'm a member of several organic farming groups based in India. And, these guys are saying every day they're reading about their neighbors committing suicide. It is horrific. And there's people on the ground, some Indian, some not, saying that this is all a lie. It's all made up. All these people did not commit suicide. I
have been to, I go to India regularly, and one of the people who talks about, the amount of suicides is Dr. Vandana Shiva.
Yes.
I've been with her and visited these villages and visited the women who've lost their husbands and their sons, who've committed suicide. This is an epidemic that's just destroying whole communities when their crops fail. And this is particularly over the BT cotton, the genetically modified cotton introduced into India. It's failing so much that farmers, because they borrowed the money to get it, they're about to lose their farm, their family, are so depressed they commit suicide. And like you say, it's hundreds of thousands. On the other hand, there's not been one organic farmer in India who's committed suicide. And once again, I've been to these areas where they grow the BT cotton, and there are organic farmers there growing cotton, and their crops are just so much better. They're so much bigger, so much resilient. And there's now even a very good scientific study showing that where these farmers grow the indigenous cotton, Indian varieties, they get higher yields, more drought tolerance compared to the BT cotton.
Right. And of course, we're not starving out the microbes in the soil when we do that, which is precisely what a lot of these chemicals do, is they starve the microbes, the microbiome of the soil. So, when you bring up cotton, sorry, I don't want to hold you up all day, but you just put so many interesting things on the table. What are some of the other places where people don't realize they're supporting Monsanto? Because a lot of us, we understand to some extent, yes, the Hawaiian papaya we cannot eat. We can't have regular wheat while we might be able to have organic. We can't have, cottonseed oil, canola, just all of these soybeans. We're aware of a lot of those things at the dinner plate, but what are other things? Ethanol and gasoline, for example.
Exactly. Ethanol uses GMO corn, for instance. And, for me, what is wrong about this, I talk about feeding the world, but when you grow food to feed tractors and cars, you're not feeding the world.
Right.
Those acreages should be used for producing food, not for producing biofuels. Every time someone buys anything that's got high fructose corn syrup in it, for instance, are supporting Monsanto. And we know also, how dangerous high fructose corn syrup is, because what happens with fructose, instead of like other sugars where it gets converted into glucose and we use it for energy, when you eat fructose, the liver converts it directly into body fat.
Yeah.
And, it's high fructose corn syrup in our foods is one of the reasons for the obesity epidemic that we have around the world. And of course, the obesity epidemic is also one of the reasons for the type 2 diabetes epidemic.
Yes.
So just avoiding high fructose corn syrup, one, because it comes from GMOs, but two, because it is essentially a toxic product that basically makes people put on weight. Doesn't matter how much they eat, it'll go straight to fat. That it should be avoided at all costs, anything with it.
Right. Right. Yeah. It gets mind boggling. And I think that's why so many people feel like, oh my God, I'm just going to give up, because no matter what, I'm screwed. is the part of the aim of iFoam and the tribunal to give us some hope, to start those, the process towards putting Monsanto out of business? Or is it not necessarily putting them out of business, but, like I said before, is it, are we trying to at least get them to change their business model so that they're, that nobody's going to argue with them? It's just, if somebody tells me that I'm doing something that is harming someone in my business, I think I'm going to change so that fewer people are harmed. But they don't take that stance because, like you said, they're psychotic.
Yeah. Look, that's what we hope will be the outcome. I think it is very important that these companies are made to account for themselves. They're really literally getting away with murder, mass murder, and what they're doing to people. So, one, we need to get the information out. We have to show what these multiple problems are that they cause, and we hope that what it does, it affects them so much that in order to survive, they do change their business model.
Right.
That is what would be preferable, and cause other companies also to change the business models. For instance, to give you an example of what other companies think about Monsanto, Monsanto tried to take over Syngenta.
Right.
And Syngenta took a lower offer for a takeover from China's major chemical
that's
company,
right, yeah.
than the Monsanto offer, because as far as they're concerned, being connected with Monsanto would damage its image.
Right.
And, it's like, essentially, it's a toxic brand out there in the marketplace. And, already what we need to do is get that brand more, actually, how can you say, you need to get the name Monsanto linked to what it's doing in people's minds so that they will change. But I think what they're really going to do, because they know their name is toxic, is they're merging with Bayer chemicals in Europe. And I think what they're going to do is keep business as usual, but just change their name, but we will go after the new name.
Right. Well, by the way, here in the U.S., we call them Bayer. Bayer aspirin. And, every kid took that nasty orange aspirin when they were little back in my day. But yeah, they are, for all intents and purposes, considered an actual life-saving organization by some people. So yeah, that will be interesting to see how that plays out. So I have to ask two more questions, and I promise I'll let you go. First of all, who owns Monsanto? Is it like one guy, or is it like round table type situation? Who owns this company, and why don't we hear more about this individual?
Well,
or people.
There are a lot of shareholders, and probably the shareholder that has the biggest public profile is Bill Gates from Microsoft.
Oh, yeah. I hate that guy.
And he owns hundreds of millions of dollars of Monsanto shares. And one of the reasons why the Gates Foundation is pushing GMOs and Monsanto's agriculture into Africa and other places, because while it looks like the Gates Foundation is Bill's philanthropy, in effect, it's become the mouthpiece for Monsanto. So the money the Gates Foundation spends, he gets back as profits from Monsanto.
Yeah, and the pharmaceutical companies, because they're huge on getting those vaccines out to Africa. Why is Africa always being picked on? Like, why does everybody think that Africa needs all of this crap?
Look, and this is a classic example of neo-colonialism where you're actually imposing our type of agriculture, Western agriculture, telling the Africans they have to use GMOs, they have to use pesticides and synthetic chemicals and to feed themselves when they don't. And, when it's got to be the other way around, I keep on saying, instead of us going there and telling them what to do, what needs to be done is empowering them to make their own decisions.
For sure.
On how they do it. But, Gates Foundation and what's basically the new green revolution for Africa is a very good example of neo-colonialism from the West.
Right. So this, talking about places that we are unwittingly spending our dollars, that are going to Monsanto, buying a PC, probably right up there, huh? Like, we're kind of supporting the same guy who's taking that money and putting it into Monsanto now.
Yeah, well, I'm one of these people because I really don't like what Gates is doing in agriculture. What he's pushing is morally wrong and reprehensible. I make sure I've got a Mac now. I'm trying to avoid anything Microsoft.
Exactly. Well, let's just hope they don't go down that road.
Yeah.
Oh, so this is possibly the most important question. It's asked by a woman by the name of Danielle Pacific. I'm not sure if that's her actual name or if she's just using that because she lives here in Hawaii. Why are the members of Monsanto such assholes? I think that gets to the heart of everybody's questions here today.
Yeah. And it gets back to the fact in these sort of toxic situations, not just the products they're making, but the actual corporate cultures are toxic. The people who can work their way up through it and get to the top have to be sociopaths or psychopaths.
Right.
A normal person who wants to emphasize with other people and cares about other people couldn't and wouldn't do this. The only people who thrive in these situations are people who are just concerned about themselves. It's all about them winning, and they don't care what happens to other people in any way. They don't care if they die from the product. They don't care if they destroy their colleagues' career as long as they get to the top. And that's the whole problem there. You've got a toxic culture that rewards psychopaths and sociopaths.
Right. And I mean, it's another Hitler all over again, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's just this what do they call him, megalomaniac? Just
exactly. The megalomaniacs. That exactly. But if you look at the criteria for sociopaths and psychopaths, you'll find that many of these executives in these top companies, Fortune 500 companies, fit this model very well.
Right. I always say that if the founding fathers of this country had known that food would one day be in jeopardy, they would have put it into the Constitution that this kind of stuff could not happen. But who in the hell would have thought that the commoditization of food would have turned into a worldwide disaster that could destroy us all. Not to be upbeat, folks, but it's true. This is what we're looking at. So, tell us how can people? This is my third question. How can people get involved?
I think this is the most important, and the easiest way is your choices when you buy, voting with your feet. At the end of the day, companies are going to change their habits when they start losing sales.
Right.
And so you need to boycott these toxic foods, these GMO foods, and only buy organic.
Right. And maybe for those of us who have a few extra dollars to spare, even if it's just $3, once a year, the Monsanto Tribunal.org, that's Monsanto-Tribunal.org, and IFOAM, which is your organization, IFOAM.bio.
I'd be very grateful for that, particularly at the moment for the Monsanto Tribunal. If you Google it, you'll see we are doing crowdfunding. We're paying for this through crowdfunding. And that's very important too, because what we have here is the People's Court.
Yes.
And by the people paying for it through crowdfunding gives it enormous credibility. And like you say, if it's just $3, that all helps. We get 10,000 people with $3 each.
Yes.
We can do a lot with that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for enlightening us, Andre Loy, on this subject. Your book, as you know, everybody else should know, is The Myths of Safe Pesticides. And folks, I want to tell you that do not think that you know it all, because if you know just a little bit, you're going to learn just 1,000% more by reading this book. It is a huge eye-opener, and especially if you want to really take your pro-Monsanto friends to task on their choices, have the data. This book is the perfect place to start. Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you too. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed talking with you.
The Nutrition Heretic Podcast is a production of Savor the Journey, LLC. Our audio editor is Nikola Popovich. Our podcast manager is Crystal McLean, and our operations manager is Linda Hansen. I'm your host, Adrienne Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic. You can find us at nutritionheretic.com, where you can download the Nutrition Heretic's free shit list of 7 health foods to avoid like the plague. You can also listen to previous episodes at nutritionheretic.com/podcast. Be sure to like us on social media for updates. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/nutritionheretic and on Twitter at NutriHeretic. Contact us with show ideas, questions, or if you just want to be a guest. And don't forget to rate our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Thanks.